Welcome to Stoic Reflections, where ancient wisdom meets modern neuroscience. Today, we explore the fascinating relationship between Stoic philosophy and dopamine, the neurotransmitter closely linked to motivation, pleasure, and emotional regulation. In our contemporary world of constant stimulation and instant gratification, many of us find ourselves caught in cycles that deplete our natural dopamine systems. Social media notifications, processed foods, and other modern conveniences provide quick dopamine hits that ultimately leave us feeling emptier than before. The consequences manifest as reduced motivation, increased anxiety, difficulty focusing, and a general sense of emotional unrest. The ancient Stoics, though lacking our scientific terminology, understood this phenomenon remarkably well. They recognized that pursuing pleasure for its own sake often leads to diminishing returns and emotional turbulence. Figures like Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius advocated practices that, viewed through our modern understanding, promote balanced dopamine function and sustainable well-being. Today, we'll explore 10 powerful strategies grounded in both Stoic wisdom and contemporary neuroscience. These approaches won't simply provide momentary highs, but will help recalibrate your dopamine system for lasting mental and emotional equilibrium. By incorporating these practices into your daily life, you'll develop resilience against the dopamine-depleting aspects of modern existence, while cultivating a more profound sense of purpose and contentment. Let's begin this journey toward neuroscientifically informed Stoic well-being. 1. Purposeful morning routines. The neuroscience. The morning hours represent a critical window for establishing your brain's chemical balance for the day. Upon waking, dopamine pathways are particularly responsive to environmental cues and behaviors. What you do in these first hours effectively programs your dopamine system for the subsequent hours. Research from the Huberman Lab at Stanford University reveals that exposure to morning sunlight triggers a cascade of neurotransmitter activity, including dopamine release. This natural dopamine elevation helps establish healthy circadian rhythms and promotes alertness and motivation throughout the day. Conversely, begin your day with artificial dopamine triggers. Checking social media, consuming sugary breakfast foods, or other highly stimulating activities can dysregulate your dopamine baseline and create dependency on increasingly intense stimuli. The Stoic approach. The Roman Stoic Seneca wrote extensively about the importance of how we begin our days. In his Moral Letters to Lucilius, he advocated for morning reflection and intention-setting writing. The spirit ought to be brought up in such a way that it has no need of fortune, that it can go forth from wealth or from poverty with the same unaltered step. Similarly, Marcus Aurelius began each day with meditative practices to orient himself toward virtue and prepare for potential challenges. In his meditations, he reminds himself, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, jealous, and surly." This wasn't pessimism, but preparation, a way to establish emotional equilibrium before engaging with the world's unpredictability. Practical implementation. Create a morning routine that combines both neuroscientific insights and Stoic wisdom. Natural light exposure. Upon waking, seek exposure to morning sunlight for 5 to 10 minutes. This naturally stimulates dopamine production without the withdrawals associated with artificial triggers. Morning reflection. Before checking devices or consuming media, spend 5 to 10 minutes in quiet reflection. Consider the potential challenges of the day ahead and set intentions for how you'll respond to them. Cold exposure. A brief cold shower or splash of cold water on your face activates the body's sympathetic nervous system, triggering natural dopamine and norepinephrine release. Delayed gratification. Intentionally postpone checking messages or social media until after completing your morning routine. This practice strengthens dopamine regulation pathways. Nutritious breakfast. Choose foods that support steady dopamine production rather than causing spikes and crashes. Protein, healthy fats, complex carbohydrates. A patient in Tucson suffering from anxiety and low motivation implemented this morning routine for 30 days. By the end of the month, she reported not only increased energy, but also greater emotional resilience when facing workplace challenges. "I'm no longer at the mercy of my emotions," she noted. "I feel a steady sense of purpose that carries me through difficulties. By establishing this intentional morning protocol, you lay neurochemical groundwork for balanced dopamine function throughout the day, creating motivation without dependency and alertness without agitation. 2. Voluntary discomfort. The neuroscience. Our dopamine systems evolved in environments of relative scarcity, where rewards required effort and discomfort. Modern convenience has disrupted this natural balance, providing dopamine rewards with minimal effort, leading to what neuroscientists call reward prediction error dysfunction. When we consistently receive rewards without proportional effort, dopamine pathways become desensitized. This manifests as anhedonia, inability to feel pleasure from normally pleasant experiences, and diminished motivation. Research from the University of California has demonstrated that voluntary exposure to mild discomfort effectively recalibrates dopamine sensitivity, enhancing the system's response to subsequent natural rewards. This phenomenon explains why a meal tastes extraordinarily delicious after physical exertion or hunger, or why warmth feels particularly pleasurable after cold exposure. The contrast creates heightened dopamine signaling. The Stoic approach, the practice of voluntary discomfort, stands as one of Stoicism's most distinctive teachings. Seneca advocated periods of practice poverty writing. Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, "Is this the condition that I feared?" Musonius Rufus, another prominent Stoic, emphasized physical hardship as training for both body and mind. We must train both body and mind, for both need their own proper training. These practices weren't about self-punishment, but about developing freedom from dependency on comfort, what modern psychologists might call building distress tolerance and enhancing dopamine sensitivity. Practical implementation. Incorporate manageable forms of voluntary discomfort into your routine. Temperature exposure. Brief cold showers, 30 to 90 seconds, or heat exposure sauna, trigger hormetic responses that strengthen dopamine pathways. Intermittent fasting. Periodic meal skipping or time-restricted eating windows create mild hunger that enhances dopamine sensitivity to subsequent meals. Physical challenges. Regular exercise that pushes your limits, whether through intensity, duration, or unfamiliar movements, recalibrates reward thresholds. Comfort zone expansions. Weekly practices that induce social or psychological discomfort, public speaking, learning difficult skills, having challenging conversations. Expand your capacity for productive stress. Digital minimalism. Scheduled periods without digital stimulation, social media, entertainment. Reset dopamine sensitivity. A finance executive in London implemented weekly 24-hour fasts and daily cold showers after struggling with chronic dissatisfaction despite his material success. Within 2 months, he reported, "I regained the ability to enjoy simple pleasures, my morning coffee or a conversation with my daughter. These now provide more satisfaction than my previous expensive indulgences." By regularly engaging with voluntary discomfort, you're not punishing yourself, but rather resetting dopamine sensitivity and building neurological resilience. The result is greater capacity for satisfaction from natural rewards and reduced dependency on artificial stimulation. 3. Meaningful goal pursuit. The neuroscience. The dopaminergic system doesn't just respond to reward attainment. It's fundamentally involved in anticipation and progress toward goals. Research from the Max Planck Institute has revealed that dopamine neurons fire most actively not upon receiving rewards, but during the pursuit of meaningful objectives with uncertain outcomes. This anticipatory dopamine creates a state of focused motivation that neuroscientists call reward prediction. However, critical distinctions exist between different types of goals and their neurochemical effects. Goals focused solely on outcomes, extrinsic motivation, tend to create dopamine spikes followed by crashes, while process-oriented goals, intrinsic motivation, generate more sustainable dopamine activity. Additionally, incremental progress recognition activates the nucleus accumbens, a key dopamine-rich brain region, providing motivational fuel for continued effort. This explains why breaking larger goals into measurable steps enhances persistence and satisfaction. The Stoic approach. The Stoics distinguished between goals within our control and those outside it, what Epictetus called the dichotomy of control. He advised, make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. For Stoics, virtue-aligned process goals held primacy over outcome goals. Marcus Aurelius wrote, just as the nature of rational things is given to each person their rational powers, so it also gives us this power. Just as nature turns obstacles into fuel, or as a fire overwhelms what would have quenched a lamp. This focus on intrinsically valuable goals rather than external validation aligns remarkably well with what modern neuroscience reveals about sustainable dopamine function. Practical implementation. Structure your goal pursuit to optimize dopamine function. Control focus goals. Emphasize goals centered on your actions rather than outcomes beyond your control. Instead of win the competition, frame it as performed to the best of my ability. Progress tracking. Create visible systems for monitoring incremental progress. Research shows physically crossing items off a list provides a dopamine boost that reinforces continued effort. Optimal challenge. Set goals within what psychologist Mihai Csikszentmihalyi calls the flow channel. Challenging enough to require focus, but not so difficult as to trigger overwhelm. Purpose alignment. Connect daily tasks to larger values and principles. The dopamine response to tasks increases significantly when they connect to meaningful purpose. Regular reflection. Schedule weekly reviews of progress and process adjustments. This reflective practice enhances dopamine-mediated learning. A teacher in Brisbane implemented these principles when feeling burnout. Rather than focusing on student performance metrics, outcomes, outside her control, she shifted to tracking her implementation of evidence-based teaching strategies and personal energy management processes within her control. Within a semester, she reported renewed motivation and surprising improvements in both her well-being and student engagement. By structuring goals around intrinsically meaningful processes rather than extrinsic rewards, you create sustainable dopamine activity that fuels motivation without dependency or crash cycles. For nature immersion. The neuroscience. Our nervous systems evolved in natural environments over millions of years. A mere evolutionary blink separates us from our nature-dwelling ancestors. Research from Nippon Medical School has demonstrated that forest bathing, Shinrin-yoku, increases dopamine levels while reducing cortisol, stress hormone, and improves immune function. The visual fractal patterns abundant in nature, present in tree branches, leaves, flowing water, induce what neuroscientists call soft fascination, a state that simultaneously engages attention while allowing mental restoration. This contrasts sharply with the hard attention demanded by digital interfaces and urban environments, which deplete dopaminergic resources. Beyond visual elements, the airborne compounds released by plants, phytoncides, have been shown to modulate neurotransmitter function favorably. Additionally, soil-based microorganisms, like Mycobacterium vaccae, stimulate serotonin production, which works synergistically with dopamine to regulate mood and motivation. The Stoic approach. While modern Stoicism is often associated with urban contexts, the ancient Stoics recognized profound value in nature connection. Seneca wrote extensively about his retreats from Rome to natural settings, noting, whenever I've gone to my country places and stayed overnight, you would hardly believe it, Lucilius. I find the atmosphere healthy for the body and for the good qualities of the mind. The Stoics viewed nature as the embodiment of rational order, what they called logos, and considered alignment with nature's patterns essential for well-being. Marcus Aurelius observed, all things are interwoven with one another. A sacred bond unites them. For there is both one universe made up of all things, and one God immanent in all things, and one substance, and one law, one reason. Practical implementation. Integrate nature connection into your routine. Daily green space. Spend at least 20 minutes daily in the most natural setting available, even if it's just a local park or garden. Sensory engagement. Practice deliberate attention to natural sensory experiences, feeling wind, listening to birds, watching patterns of light through leaves. Natural light cycling. Align your exposure to light with natural patterns. Bright light in morning, dimmer light in evening, to regulate dopamine's role in circadian function. Earthing/grounding. Regular direct skin contact with natural surfaces, grass, soil, sand, has been shown to modulate nervous system activity. Indoor nature elements. When outdoor access is limited, incorporate natural materials, plants, and nature imagery into your living and working spaces. A software developer in Seattle suffering from attention problems and low motivation began spending 30 minutes in a nearby forest before work 3 times weekly. After 6 weeks, she reported, "Not only has my focus improved dramatically, but I experience a kind of contentment I haven't felt since childhood. Even routine tasks now carry a sense of meaning." By regularly immersing in natural environments, you provide your nervous system with the conditions under which it evolved to function optimally, supporting balanced dopamine activity without the depletion effects of artificial stimulation. 5. Mindful dopamine awareness. The neuroscience. The prefrontal cortex, our brain's executive center, can modulate dopamine release through conscious awareness and attention direction. Neuroimaging studies show that mindful observation of cravings and impulses activates regulatory circuits that can dampen excessive dopamine-seeking behaviors. This process, termed extinction learning, involves creating new neural pathways that override automatic stimulus response patterns. When we observe our cravings with non-judgmental awareness rather than immediately acting on them, we effectively rewire dopamine circuitry toward greater equilibrium. Research from Harvard Medical School demonstrates that regular mindfulness practice increases gray matter density in brain regions associated with self-awareness, compassion, and introspection while reducing activity in the default mode network associated with rumination and anxiety. The Stoic approach. The Stoics pioneered practices remarkably similar to modern mindfulness, particularly through their emphasis on prosoche attention and phantasia cataleptique, cognitive distancing from impressions. Epictetus instructed, "Make it your study then to confront every harsh impression with the words, 'You are but an impression, and not at all what you seem to be.'" This closely parallels modern mindfulness instructions to observe thoughts and sensations without automatically identifying with them. Marcus Aurelius practiced regular self-observation. Observe constantly that all things take place by change, and accustom yourself to consider that the nature of the universe loves nothing so much as to change the things which are and to make new things like them. Practical implementation. Develop mindful awareness of your dopamine systems. Urge surfing. When experiencing cravings for dopamine-triggering substances or behaviors, social media, sugar, etc., practice observing the sensation without acting on it. Notice how it rises, peaks, and subsides like a wave. Stimulus cataloging. Create a personal inventory of what triggers dopamine-seeking behavior in your life. Categorize these as natural/sustainable versus artificial/depleting. Pleasure pausing. Before engaging with pleasurable stimuli, institute a 30-second pause for conscious choice rather than automatic consumption. Body scanning. Practice daily attention to physical sensations associated with different emotional states, developing your ability to recognize subtle signals before they drive behavior. Formal meditation. Establish a regular meditation practice focused on observing thoughts and sensations without attachment or aversion. A marketing executive in Toronto implemented these practices after recognizing his dependency on work-related validation. "I realized I was constantly checking email for the dopamine hit of client approval," he reported. After 3 months of mindfulness practice, he noted, "I can now feel the desire for validation arise and choose not to chase it. This has paradoxically made me more effective and creative in my work." By developing mindful awareness of your dopamine system, you transform from being driven by unconscious chemical cascades to consciously engaging with them, creating space for choice rather than compulsion. 6. Social connection and service. The neuroscience. Human brains contain specialized neural circuits dedicated to social connection and cooperation. The ventral striatum, a key dopamine-rich region, activates robustly during pro-social behaviors and meaningful connection, often producing stronger and more sustainable dopamine responses than individualistic pleasure-seeking. Research from Emory University reveals that acts of generosity activate neural pathways that release not only dopamine but also serotonin and oxytocin, creating a helper's high that promotes emotional well-being. Importantly, these prosocial dopamine responses show minimal habituation compared to consumption-based pleasures, meaning they continue providing satisfaction without requiring escalation. Conversely, social isolation and excessive self-focus activate the brain's threat detection systems, increasing inflammatory markers and reducing dopamine sensitivity. Neuroimaging studies demonstrate that social rejection activates the same brain regions as physical pain, highlighting connection's fundamental role in human neurochemistry. The Stoic approach. The Stoics emphasized humanity's fundamentally social nature. Hierocles, a Stoic philosopher, described humanity as existing in concentric circles of concern, from self and family outward to all humanity, advocating for expanding one circle of care. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "We were born to work together like feet, hands, and eyes, like the two rows of teeth, upper and lower. To obstruct each other is unnatural." Elsewhere he observed, "What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee." Seneca emphasized that helping others benefits the giver. No one can live happily who has regard to himself alone and transforms everything into a question of his own utility. Practical implementation. Cultivate social connection and service as dopamine-regulating practices. Regular volunteering. Commit to consistent service rather than one-time events. Research shows the neurochemical benefits accumulate with sustained engagement. Skill-based contribution. Offer your specific talents and abilities to causes you value. Combining mastery with contribution produces particularly potent dopamine responses. Relationship rituals. Establish regular meaningful connection points with others. Shared meals, conversations, or activities without digital distraction. Gratitude expression. Actively communicate appreciation to others. Both expressing and receiving gratitude stimulate positive neurochemical cascades. Perspective expansion. Regularly engage with individuals from different backgrounds and experiences to activate neural networks associated with empathy and cognitive flexibility. A retired engineer in Portland suffering from depression established a weekly mentoring program for disadvantaged youth, teaching robotics and coding. Within 3 months, his symptoms had significantly decreased. "For years, I tried to feel better through entertainment and hobbies," he shared. Nothing approached the satisfaction of seeing these kids light up when they solve a problem. By orienting toward connection and contribution, you engage dopamine pathways that evolved specifically for pro-social functioning, creating satisfaction that doesn't deplete with repetition and doesn't require escalation to maintain efficacy. 7. Philosophical meaning-making. The neuroscience. The prefrontal cortex, the brain region most expanded in humans compared to other primates, enables abstract meaning-making and value integration. This cognitive capacity profoundly influences dopamine regulation through top-down processing, where conceptual frameworks actually reshape neurochemical responses to experiences. Research from the University of Pennsylvania demonstrates that people who maintain coherent meaning systems show greater activation in reward processing centers when facing challenges, effectively transforming potential distress into engagement. This meaning-mediated dopamine release creates resilience against both hedonic adaptation, diminishing pleasure from repeated stimuli, and existential distress. Additionally, studies show that cognitive reframing, interpreting events through meaningful philosophical frameworks, reduces activity in threat detection centers while increasing activity in reward and self-regulation regions. This neurological integration allows for sustained motivation without requiring constant novel stimulation. The Stoic approach. The Stoics were masters of philosophical meaning-making, developing systematic approaches to interpreting life events within a coherent framework of virtue and natural order. Epictetus provided a cornerstone of this approach. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. This cognitive perspective allowed Stoics to maintain equanimity by focusing on their interpretations rather than external circumstances. Marcus Aurelius practiced continuous philosophical reframing. Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth. And elsewhere, choose not to be harmed, and you won't feel harmed. Don't feel harmed, and you haven't been. Practical implementation. Develop philosophical meaning-making practices. Daily philosophical reflection. Set aside time each day for contemplating how philosophical principles apply to your experiences. Journal about how Stoic concepts like virtue, impermanence, or the dichotomy of control relate to current circumstances. Adversity reframing. When facing challenges, practice deliberately interpreting them through philosophical lenses. Ask yourself, how might this difficulty serve as training for virtue? Or what aspects of this situation remain within my control? Memento mori contemplation, regular reflection on mortality, a core Stoic practice, paradoxically enhances dopamine function by increasing present moment appreciation and reducing fixation on trivial concerns. Values clarification. Periodically review and refine your core values, creating a coherent framework for interpreting experiences and making decisions. Philosophical reading practice. Engage regularly with philosophical texts, not as mere information acquisition, but as training in alternative perspectives and interpretative frameworks. A physician in Melbourne implemented philosophical reflection practices during a period of professional burnout. Rather than viewing difficult patients as obstacles to efficiency, she reframed these interactions as opportunities to practice virtues of patience and compassion. This shift wasn't just psychological comfort, she reported. It transformed my physiological response to stress. My heart rate remained steady in situations that previously triggered anxiety and resentment. By developing robust philosophical frameworks for meaning-making, you create cognitive structures that regulate dopamine function from the top down, finding sustainable motivation and satisfaction through interpretation rather than endless seeking of new stimuli. 8. Dopamine-conscious nutrition. The neuroscience. The neurotransmitters that regulate mood and motivation, including dopamine, are synthesized from dietary precursors and influenced by overall metabolic health. Tyrosine, an amino acid abundant in protein-rich foods, serves as the primary building block for dopamine production. Research from MIT demonstrates that protein consumption increases tyrosine availability in the brain, supporting dopamine synthesis. Conversely, diets high in refined carbohydrates create blood glucose volatility that disrupts dopamine regulation, causing spikes and crashes that can manifest as mood swings, cravings, and attention problems. Beyond macronutrients, specific micronutrients play crucial roles in dopamine function. Iron, vitamin B6, folate, and magnesium serve as cofactors in dopamine synthesis and regulation. Deficiencies in these nutrients correlate with reduced dopamine activity and symptoms like fatigue, apathy, and anhedonia. Additionally, the gut microbiome directly influences dopamine signaling through the gut-brain axis. Certain bacterial species produce compounds that modulate neurotransmitter function, explaining why digestive health often correlates with mood and motivation. The Stoic approach. While the Stoics lacked our biochemical understanding, they advocated mindful and moderate nutrition. Musonius Rufus wrote extensively about diet, advising, "The foods that are easiest to obtain are also the most healthful. One should prefer foods that don't require the cook's art." Seneca criticized elaborate cuisine not on moralistic grounds, but for its tendency to create dependency. The pleasure of eating we should take not in the expensive taste of food, but in our own hunger. This approach emphasized eating for well-being rather than momentary pleasure, distinguishing between foods that provide sustainable satisfaction and those that create dependency cycles through artificial stimulation. Practical implementation. Adopt nutrition practices that support dopamine balance. Protein adequacy. Ensure sufficient protein intake, generally 0.8-1 g per kilogram of body weight daily, to provide tyrosine for dopamine synthesis. Blood sugar stability. Minimize refined carbohydrates and sugars that create dopamine-disrupting glucose volatility. Favor complex carbohydrates paired with protein, fiber, and healthy fats. Micronutrient focus. Emphasize foods rich in dopamine-supporting nutrients. Iron, legumes, spinach, red meat. B vitamins, eggs, leafy greens, nutritional yeast. Magnesium, dark chocolate, nuts, seeds. Omega-3 fatty acids, fatty fish, flaxseed, walnuts. Gut health support. Include fermented foods, yogurt, sauerkraut, kefir, and prebiotic fibers to nourish beneficial gut bacteria that support neurotransmitter regulation. Mindful consumption. Practice attentive eating without distractions, focusing on internal satiety cues rather than external triggers or emotional drivers. A graduate student in Dublin struggling with afternoon energy crashes and difficulty concentrating implemented these nutritional approaches. After 6 weeks, she reported, I've stopped experiencing the desperate hunger and irritability that used to hit around 3 p.m. My energy feels stable throughout the day, and I'm no longer dependent on sugar and caffeine to maintain focus. By aligning your nutrition with dopamine biochemistry, you provide the physical foundation for stable motivation and mood while reducing dependency on stimulating foods that create withdrawal cycles. 9. Sleep optimization. The neuroscience. Sleep quality directly impacts dopamine synthesis, receptor sensitivity, and transporter function. During deep sleep stages, the brain replenishes dopamine reserves and performs necessary maintenance on dopaminergic neurons. Research from the University of Tsukuba in Japan demonstrates that sleep deprivation significantly reduces dopamine D2 receptor availability in the striatum, a key reward processing region. This reduction manifests as decreased motivation, impaired decision-making, increased impulsivity, and heightened cravings for stimulating substances and behaviors. The relationship works bidirectionally. Dopamine dysregulation, excessive stimulation from technology, substances, or stress, disrupts sleep architecture by interfering with the brain's ability to properly cycle through sleep stages. This creates a potential negative spiral where poor sleep further impairs dopamine function, driving compensatory stimulation seeking that further disrupts sleep. Circadian rhythm synchronization also plays a crucial role. Morning light exposure sets proper timing for dopamine-regulating hormones like cortisol, while evening light, particularly blue light from screens, disrupts melatonin production necessary for restorative sleep. The Stoic approach. The Stoics recognize sleep's importance for mental clarity and emotional regulation. Seneca advised, "We should take wandering walks so that the body may be tired out and may make the mind fall asleep together with itself." Marcus Aurelius practiced evening reflection as preparation for restorative sleep. Allow yourself a space of quiet, wherein you can add to your knowledge of the good and learn to curb your restlessness. This practice, similar to modern sleep hygiene recommendations, helps separate daily concerns from a sleep period. The Stoic emphasis on natural functioning also aligns with circadian biology. Epictetus observed, "To live in accordance with nature is to live in accordance with virtue," suggesting alignment with natural rhythms as part of a well-lived life. Practical implementation. Optimize sleep for dopamine regulation. Consistent timing. Maintain regular sleep-wake schedules that align with natural light patterns. This synchronizes circadian rhythms that govern dopamine fluctuations. Morning light exposure. Seek bright natural light within 30 to 60 minutes of waking to properly set circadian timing and support healthy dopamine cycling. Evening wind down. Create a deliberate transition period, 30 to 60 minutes, before sleep without screens, work, or stimulating content. This dopamine fast before sleep improves both sleep quality and next-day dopamine sensitivity. Sleep environment optimization. Ensure your sleeping space is cool, 65-68 degree F/18-20 degree C, dark and quiet. Conditions that support deeper sleep stages where dopamine regulation occurs. Pre-sleep reflection. Practice a brief Stoic review of the day before sleep, acknowledging both successes and areas for improvement without judgment. This mental closure helps prevent rumination that disrupts sleep onset. An attorney in Chicago suffering from irritability and declining work performance discovered he averaged only 5.5 hours of sleep nightly. After implementing these sleep practices and increasing his sleep to 7 hours, he reported, "The change feels almost miraculous. Tasks that seemed overwhelming now feel manageable. I'm no longer constantly seeking stimulation to maintain focus, and my emotional resilience has dramatically improved." By prioritizing sleep quality and alignment with natural circadian patterns, you support optimal dopamine function, creating sustainable energy and motivation without reliance on artificial stimulation. The intersection of ancient Stoic wisdom and modern neuroscience offers powerful insights for anyone seeking greater well-being in our stimulation-saturated world. By implementing these 10 strategies, you engage in what might be called dopamine stewardship, the conscious cultivation of neurochemical balance that supports sustainable motivation, satisfaction, and emotional equilibrium. The Stoics understood intuitively what science now confirms. True well-being comes not from maximizing pleasure, but from alignment with our nature, including our neurobiological nature. Their practices of voluntary discomfort, philosophical reframing, and focus on what lies within our control directly support healthy dopamine function. As you incorporate these approaches into your life, remember that small, consistent actions create more lasting neural change than dramatic but unsustainable interventions. Begin with modest implementations of these strategies, building gradually as your capacity increases. The path of dopamine wisdom isn't about denying pleasure, but about cultivating a more profound and sustainable form of satisfaction, one that doesn't depend on escalating stimulation or create withdrawal symptoms when stimulation is absent. It's about reclaiming autonomy from unconscious chemical drivers and establishing a more conscious relationship with motivation and reward. In the words of Epictetus, freedom is secured not by the fulfilling of desires, but by the removal of desire. From our modern neuroscientific perspective, we might reframe this as freedom comes not from chasing dopamine, but from balancing our dopamine systems through conscious living. By walking this integrative path between ancient wisdom and contemporary science, you develop not just theories about well-being, but practical mastery of the neurochemical systems that influence your experience each day. The result is a life characterized not by hedonic peaks and valleys, but by eudaimonic well-being, a sense of meaningful engagement and capability that transcends momentary pleasure-seeking. This is the Stoic path to dopamine balance, a journey toward sustainable well-being in an age of unprecedented stimulation. May you walk it with awareness, patience, and growing mastery. Practical implementation program. To translate these concepts into lasting change, consider this 30-day implementation program that gradually incorporates all 10 strategies. Week 1, foundation building. Day 1 to 3, morning routine development. Begin with just 5 minutes of morning sunlight exposure. Add a brief morning reflection on your intentions for the day. Delay checking devices for at least 15 minutes after waking. Day 4 to 7, sleep optimization. Establish consistent sleep and wake times. Create a 30-minute technology-free wind-down ritual. Optimize your sleeping environment for temperature and darkness. Week 2, mindful awareness. Day 8 to 10, dopamine awareness. Start noticing and logging dopamine-triggering behaviors. Practice urge surfing when cravings arise. Implement 30-second pauses before engaging with stimulating media. Day 11 to 14, technology boundaries. Designate specific technology-free zones in your home. Batch process notifications rather than responding immediately. Establish defined periods for media consumption rather than constant access. Week 3, physical foundations. Day 15 to 17, nutrition adjustment. Increase protein intake at breakfast to support dopamine production. Reduce refined sugar consumption. Add fermented foods to support gut-brain axis health. Day 18 to 21, voluntary discomfort. Implement brief cold exposure, 30 seconds in cold shower. Practice 16:8 intermittent fasting one day this week. Engage in one challenging physical activity outside your comfort zone. Week 4, meaning and connection. Day 22 to 24, philosophical framework. Spend 10 minutes daily reading Stoic texts. Journal about how Stoic principles apply to current challenges. Practice adversity reframing when difficulties arise. Day 25 to 28, social connection. Reach out to one person daily with genuine appreciation. Volunteer or contribute skills to a cause aligned with your values. Have one meaningful conversation without digital distractions. Day 29 to 30, integration and reflection. Review your experiences with each practice. Note which strategies provided greatest benefit. Develop a sustainable, ongoing implementation plan. Review your experiences with each practice. Note which strategies provided greatest benefit. Develop a sustainable, ongoing implementation plan. Throughout this program, maintain a daily journal tracking both objective measures, sleep quality, energy levels, focus duration, and subjective experiences, emotional states, sense of meaning, quality of motivation. This documentation provides valuable feedback about which practices most effectively regulate your unique dopamine system. Remember that neurochemical balance is not achieved through perfect implementation, but through consistent attention and adjustment. The goal isn't rigid adherence to specific practices, but developing a conscious relationship with your dopamine system that supports sustainable well-being. As Marcus Aurelius advised, if you work at that which is before you, following right reasons seriously, vigorously, calmly, without allowing anything else to distract you, if you hold to this, expecting nothing, fearing nothing, but satisfied with your present activities according to nature, you will live a happy life. Addressing common challenges. As you implement these dopamine balancing strategies, you'll likely encounter specific challenges. Here are practical approaches to overcoming common obstacles. Challenge 1. Withdrawal discomfort. When reducing artificial dopamine triggers, you may initially experience symptoms like irritability, restlessness, difficulty focusing, or intense cravings. This discomfort, signaling neurochemical recalibration, typically peaks within 24 to 72 hours before gradually subsiding. Solutions. Implement changes gradually rather than attempting radical shifts. Use mindfulness practices to observe discomfort without judgment. Substitute natural dopamine-supporting activities during withdrawal periods. Remember that discomfort signals healing, not harm. Challenge 2. Social environment resistance. Your social connections may unintentionally reinforce dopamine dysregulating habits through shared activities, expectations, or communication patterns. Solutions. Clearly communicate your intentions without imposing expectations on others. Suggest alternative activities that support connection without requiring artificial stimulation. Find community, online or local, with individuals pursuing similar balance. Apply the Stoic practice of maintaining internal values regardless of external circumstances. Challenge 3. Environmental constraints. Work requirements, living situations, or other practical realities may limit implementation of certain strategies. Solutions. Focus first on invisible practices that don't require external change. Mindfulness, philosophical reframing. Identify small environmental modifications with outsized impact. Morning light, bedside phone ban. Apply the Stoic dichotomy of control. Focus energy on aspects within your influence. Practice creative constraint, finding ways to implement principles within limitations. Challenge 4. Consistency challenges. Maintaining new habits requires overcoming the neural tendency to revert to established patterns. Solutions. Use implementation intentions. When X happens, I will do Y, rather than relying on motivation. Create environmental triggers that cue desired behaviors. Track consistency visually to leverage the dopamine reward of documented progress. Apply self-compassion rather than self-criticism when lapses occur. Challenge 5. Plateau experiences. After initial improvements, you may experience periods where benefits seem to level off. Solutions. Recognize this as normal neuroadaptation rather than failure. Periodically adjust practice parameters, duration, intensity, approach to create novel challenge. Deepen philosophical engagement with practices rather than merely mechanistic implementation. Focus on subtle qualitative improvements rather than dramatic shifts. By anticipating these challenges and preparing specific responses, you transform potential obstacles into opportunities for deeper implementation. Just as the Stoics taught us to view impediments as the path for growth rather than barriers to progress. The neuroscience of habit formation. Understanding how habits form at the neurological level provides powerful leverage for implementing dopamine balancing practices. Habit formation involves several key brain regions and processes. The basal ganglia circuit. This ancient brain structure orchestrates automatic behaviors through dopaminergic reinforcement. When an action leads to reward dopamine release, this circuit strengthens the neural pathway connecting cue, routine, and reward. The prefrontal cortex. This evolutionarily newer region enables conscious decision-making and planning. Initially, habit implementation requires significant prefrontal effort, which explains why new practices feel mentally taxing. Neuroplasticity mechanisms. Repeated behaviors trigger the release of brain-derived neurotrophic factor BDNF, which facilitates the growth of new neural connections supporting the emerging habit. Research from MIT reveals that as habits become established, neural activity shifts from the prefrontal cortex to the basal ganglia, transforming consciously directed actions into automatic routines requiring minimal cognitive bandwidth. This chunking process explains why established habits eventually feel effortless. Understanding this neurological progression suggests specific strategies for effective habit implementation. The 66-day reality. Contrary to popular belief that habits form in 21 days, research from University College London indicates the average is 66 days, with considerable individual variation, 18 to 254 days. Set realistic time frames for expecting automaticity. The implementation intention formula. Framing habits as, when specific situation, I will specific action, creates stronger neural associations than vague intentions. The minimum viable habit. Begin with smaller versions of target behaviors, even just 1 to 2 minutes, to establish neural pathways before expanding duration or complexity. The environmental pre-commitment. Modify your environment to reduce friction for desired behaviors and increase friction for unwanted habits, thereby directing dopamine seeking toward constructive paths. The reward scheduling. Initially provide immediate, tangible rewards for new habits before transitioning to appreciation of intrinsic benefits as neural pathways strengthen. While we've explored dopamine primarily through its role in motivation and reward, emerging research reveals a profound connection between dopamine function and our experience of meaning, the sense that our lives and actions matter within a larger context. The ventral tegmental area (VTA), a key dopamine-producing region, activates not only during reward anticipation, but also during experiences of transcendence, awe, and meaningful contribution. This suggests dopamine's role extends beyond hedonic pleasure to eudaimonic well-being, the sense of living a worthwhile life aligned with deeper values. Studies from the University of Missouri demonstrate that individuals who report high levels of meaning show more balanced dopamine function, with stronger responses to natural rewards and reduced vulnerability to addictive patterns. This creates a potential virtuous cycle. Balanced dopamine supports meaning perception, while meaningful engagement promotes dopamine regulation. The Stoics intuited this connection between meaning and neurochemical equilibrium. Their concept of eudaimonia, flourishing, involved living virtuously in accordance with nature, a state we now understand involves optimal neurochemical balance. Their practices weren't merely philosophical abstractions, but practical methods for aligning mind, body, and character. This integration of dopamine regulation and meaningful living offers the most sustainable approach to well-being in our hyperstimulated age. Rather than treating dopamine balance as merely a neurochemical project or meaning as purely philosophical, we recognize them as two perspectives on the same integrated human experience. As you implement the practices we've explored, remember that the ultimate goal isn't perfect dopamine regulation for its own sake, but a life where neurochemical balance supports meaningful engagement with what matters most, where stable motivation and satisfaction arise naturally from alignment with deeper values and virtuous action. In the words of Marcus Aurelius, the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. Modern neuroscience affirms this ancient wisdom, revealing how our philosophical perspectives, daily practices, and neurochemical functions interweave to create our lived experience. By consciously engaging with both ancient wisdom and contemporary science, you embark on what might be called the meta-Stoic path, applying the Stoic principle of working with rather than against nature to your own neurochemical nature. This integration offers not just momentary well-being, but sustainable flourishing in an age of unprecedented challenges to attention, motivation, and meaning. May your journey toward dopamine wisdom bring you not just balance, but a profound sense of alignment with your highest nature, the ultimate promise of both Stoic philosophy and enlightened neuroscience.